Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you've just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theorycraft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we are continuing our Gloomhaven series of character builds, where we try to take the character classes from the hit board game Gloomhaven and recreate them in Dungeons & Dragons. We're also doing another locked character class today, and we are making the Saw class from Gloomhaven. As usual, this is going to be our spoiler warning. If you don't want any spoilers for this class in particular, feel free to watch the video at a later time, but if you already know what the character class is, or you just don't really care about spoilers that much, then feel free to come along for the journey. I'll do a quick pause here, but after this we'll jump right into the build. So let this be our last spoiler warning for the Saw class. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. Today we are making the Saw class, which is also known as the Sawbones. The Sawbones is thematically a combat medic sort of character. They serve the religion of the Great Oak in Gloomhaven lore, and they're technically supposed to be a healer, usually involved in combat situations and actually patching people up on the battlefield. Mechanically, however, we are a character that is not just a healer necessarily. Even though we might look like a combat medic or some sort of doctor according to our artwork, there's actually a pretty viable build for damage/control in the Sawbones, and not just full support. They have access to a special set of cards called medkit cards, which they can then hand out to other players, and those players can then choose to use those cards to either heal themselves as though it was an actual medkit, or they can use them for just basic actions such as attack or move. That is the primary source of a Sawbones healing. However, we do have access to some healing actions, but all our healing actions are only ever range 1. We're not using magic to heal necessarily, we're actually walking up and patching up our allies when they need it. There are a few other support abilities that the Sawbones has access to, like we can just permanently give allies of ours either shield, an immunity to negative conditions, and those are all great. But we're not really going to worry too much about those in particular. However, we are going to worry about trying to recreate the medkit abilities today, as well as probably some healing. The other stuff we're really going to want to worry about is the damage, because the Sawbones, although not a tanky character, is a melee frontline damage dealer. They have access to a lot of strong attacks, and a lot of attacks that provide debuffs to their enemies. So this is going to be something that we're really going to be looking at when we're trying to actually pick up some damage for our Sawbones in D&D. Before we start into the actual build though, let's look at their flavor text. Perhaps one of the most respected professions in human society is to serve the Great Oak. Followers of the Oak are religious healers who do their best to ward off the pestilence and death that manifest in larger human cities. Contrary to popular belief, however, there's nothing miraculous about their healing methods, as anyone who has come to them with a gangrenous leg knows all too well. The mystique of the profession can get lost amongst the screams when the Sawbones has to hack off a limb. Starting at character creation with our lineage, we are another human, the same as our scoundrel was. That means we're going to be using human variant for this build. We could go custom lineage, but human variant is already built into D&D, so it feels like it's reasonable to allow it to have some use. Plus, we still get the free feat anyways, as well as a bonus skill, since we wouldn't want to take Dark Vision because we're just a human. But the big benefit is that we get to improve 2 ability scores of our choice by +1, rather than just boosting 1 ability score by +2. For our free feat, we aren't choosing a half feat or anything that's going to boost our ability scores, which is why I really liked human variant over custom lineage here. We're going to be taking the healer feat. When we take the healer feat, we gain 2 benefits when using a healer's kit. When we stabilize a creature, they automatically come back with 1 hit point instead of just being stable, and we gain access to a special action that allows us to heal an ally of ours for 1d6 plus 4 plus the amount of hit die that that ally has, which is essentially their level. That is a pretty powerful amount of healing, and it scales really well. The only unfortunate thing is that they can only benefit from that healing once per rest. Into our stats, we're going to want quite a few different ability scores to be at least okay, like I said before. So for us, we're going to put our +1s into dexterity and intelligence. After point by, we are going to want the following list of ability scores: 8 strength, 16 dexterity, 14 constitution, 14 intelligence, 13 wisdom, and 9 charisma. As the Sawbones, we do know how to save someone's life on the battlefield, but that doesn't really mean we have good bedside manner. Finally, for our background, we actually have a lot of good options. Anything that gives us a good set of skills, plus feels thematically appropriate should work. So we could be something like a sage who has actually studied medicine and is really knowledgeable about our craft. Or we could be a soldier who has served in an army as an actual frontline combat medic. Anything else that you can think of works perfectly fine, so feel free to pick your favorite. Jumping into the actual level breakdown of the build now, at level 1, we're starting off as a rogue. This is kind of an interesting choice, but it's really what's going to be allowing us to scale our damage really well with sneak attack. We will pick up more actual healing-oriented features later on, but for right now, as a rogue, we get sneak attack right away, we get expertise, and we also get Thieves' Cant. Thieves' Cant is just a nice little ribbon feature for us. It's not going to be too important, but for our expertise, that's probably where we're going to be most useful, since we can now become an expert in medicine, making it very easy for us to actually stabilize characters with our healer's kits. We can also pick another skill that we want to be really good at, and that gives us a little bit more utility, which is awesome. And our sneak attack is going to be our main source of damage, like I had said, so we want to try and help that scale as best as possible. At level 2, we are Rogue 2, and here we just gain Cunning Action. Cunning Action allows us to dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action on our turn. And similar to Thieves' Cant, the hide action isn't really something we're going to want to do, but it's nice to have. What we do want, however, is the dash ability and the disengage ability, because those both provide a lot of mobility when we're actually in combat. And as the Sawbones, we're going to be wanting to dash around to actually get to our allies in order to heal them. So that means that having the ability to just disengage as a bonus action or to dash as a bonus action gives us a lot of options for our mobility. At level 3, we're still a Rogue 3, and we now get to choose our subclass. I'm going to go with Thief, though you could pick a couple different subclasses here, but let me explain why with Thief. We gain access to fast hands. We also gain second story work, but that's not really that important unless we have to climb to get to an ally of ours to heal them. But for fast hands, we can do the old exploit now of using a bonus action, our cunning action, to interact with an object or use an item. That's really nice because as a lot of veterans of D&D may know, that interact with an object action means we can use a bonus action to feed someone else a healing potion or take one ourselves. Depending on how your table plays, usually a potion is an action to take or at least to give to someone else. For us now though, that is just straight up going to be a bonus action, as well as any other items or magic items that might help us in combat or help us with healing. We can now use those as bonus actions. The only time this becomes a bit of an issue is when a feature specifically says as an action. One example would be our Healer's Feat ability to just heal. Although it uses the Healer's Kit in order for us to actually patch up our ally, it still says as an action explicitly. If your DM is nice, they might be generous and allow you to use your Cunning Action Fast Hands with the Healer's Feat special healing action. If they're going to be a little bit more strict though and play rules as written, then that means that even though we could use our Healer's Kit to stabilize a creature as a bonus action, to actually give them hit points back is always going to be an action. At level 4, we are Rogue 4, and here we gain our first ability score improvement or feat. Now here, I'm actually going to admit that I got something a little wrong in a previous video. When I was building our Sun character, we took a feat called Agent of Order because it gave us a stasis strike, which essentially I counted as like a stun or a mobilize effect. Well, we still want that stasis strike, but the thing that I missed is that that Agent of Order feat requires a prerequisite feat of Scion of the Outer Planes, or Scion, depending on how you pronounce that. Now, if your DM is nice, they may allow you to just take Agent of Order and not really care about the Scion of the Outer Planes, but for the sake of this theory crafting build, and for the sake of playing rules as written, I'm going to say that we're going to have to take it. That would technically change our Sun character, but for what it's worth, I'll just let that be. It just means that there's an extra feat that they have to pick up if they really want Agent of Order. And for us, we're just going to make sure that we have room to pick it up. So, right now we are taking Agent of Order, and that allows us to align ourselves with one of the outer planes of the D&D multiverse. Thematically, this is kind of weird, but for us, we're just saying that we are a good aligned character because we're technically a religious sort of healer who works with the religion of the Great Oak. So this kind of makes sense actually for us. And because we aligned ourselves with the plane of good, that means we have resistance to radiant damage, and we gain Sacred Flame as a cantrip. We can also choose to use Intelligence with Sacred Flame, which is a big benefit, since now that just can act as a ranged ability. Overall, it's a little bit more thematic and ribbon focused rather than something that we actually need. So if you didn't want this or the Agent of Order feature, feel free to do anything else with your ability score improvements. At level 5, we're going to jump over to Artificer actually. We have the intelligence to be able to multi-class, so we're going to jump over in order to pick up some actual spell casting plus magical tinkering. The magical tinkering isn't too important, but the spell casting is. We now gain access to Artificer spells, which are mostly utility focused, but we also get Cure Wounds, which we'll probably want to use every now and then. And the utility focus of the Artificer really blends well with our rogue character build so far, because we have a lot of skills that we're very good at, and we can provide a lot of out-of-combat utility, plus in combat we can either do a little bit of damage with our sneak attack, which is now an extra 2d6, or we can be running around and healing our allies with either our Healer's Kit feature or our Cure Wounds, assuming we pick that up. At level 6, we're an Artificer 2, and we now gain Infused Item. Infused Item says that we can infuse 2 items to become magical, and we know 4 infusions to pick from. Really, Artificers might usually play a little selfish and just pick items that they're going to use, or they might be generous and give them out to our party. And for us, we're going to skew more towards being generous. If you want, you could pick some items that give you a little bit more of a damage buff, or perhaps add a debuff to an enemy, which there are some items that do that, but they might not be readily available right away. However, really for the most part, I'm assuming that we're just picking 2 items that our party members really want, and we're just giving them out to them, just providing a little bit more of a utility bonus on top of all the other utility that we already do. Level 7, we're an Artificer 3, so we now gain our choice of Artificer subclass, as well as Right Tool for the Job. Right Tool for the Job just lets us create some tools whenever we really need them, and that's a bit more utility, and we're probably not going to use it too much. However, for our subclass, we're going to become an Alchemist. As an Alchemist, we gain access to some Alchemist spells if we want them, one of which is actually Healing Word. I'm going to say that we're actually breaking our rule of being a thematic Sawbones, and we're going to take Healing Word. It's just too efficient of a healing spell to pass up, especially once we eventually get some more bonuses to our healing later on. It does mean that we can now heal from range instead of actually being in the action, and that might not always be something that you want to do, depending on how often you want to use your cunning action, but it's a nice option to have in our back pocket if we really need it. We also gain proficiency in Alchemist tools, and we can now use them as our spellcasting focus, which will be important later. And finally, we gain Experimental Elixir. Experimental Elixir allows us to, at the end of a long rest, create a random, admittedly, elixir, which we can then give out to our party members to use as an action on themselves, or we can keep it for ourselves if we wanted. We can then also use our spell slots to actually create elixirs and pick which of the elixirs we want to have. There's a little chart of options, and they all provide some pretty good benefits for the most part. And this is really what's going to mimic our medkit features. Our medkits in Gloomhaven are predominantly about healing. However, because they are just extra cards that get added to other players' hands, that means that they're also about providing stamina and action economy to those players, not just healing. This is why I think Experimental Elixir are probably a better way of mimicking our medkits. We can theme it as we're not creating elixirs, we're putting together some sort of medkit that is specially designed to provide the specific bonus it's supposed to provide to that ally. However you want to theme it, this is our main feature right now. Also, in your off time, make sure you pick up a Herbalist kit so you can actually craft potions, because we still want as many healing potions as possible, so that way we can use fast hands to force feed the healing potions to allies who need them in the time when they do need them. At level 8, we are an Artificer 4, and here we are going to pick up our next ability score improvement / feat. And for us, that is going to be Agent of Order. Agent of Order is a half feat, so we can improve one of our ability scores by +1, and then we gain Stasis Strike. Stasis Strike is an ability we can use a number of times equal to our proficiency, and when we do use it, it has to be on an attack. That attack deals an extra d8 of damage, as well as the enemy has to make a save, or else they will become restrained. For the sake of our build, I'm counting Restrained as either Stun or Immobilize, since the Sawbones has access to both. And with the ability score that we're going to improve, I'm going to say Dexterity, because we do want our Dexterity to be relatively as high as possible in order to keep our damage scaling sort of well. We'll want to increase our Intelligence eventually too, but for now, Dexterity is probably the way to go. I will say as an optional replacement for Agent of Order, if we didn't want to take this feat, or we didn't want to take Scion of the Other Planes in order to take this feat, Poisoner would be a good option too. It's not a half feat and it doesn't really provide us with our scaling, and admittedly Poisoner ends up scaling pretty poorly later on, but the Sawbones has access to the Poison condition from Gloomhaven, and just like our Scoundrel, the Poisoner feat is one of the best ways to apply the Poison condition. At level 9, we're an Artificer 5, and this is probably the last little bit of Artificer we're going to take for at least a while, but what it does get us is a very powerful bonus effect. We are an Alchemical Savant, which allows us to, whenever we cast a spell through our Alchemist supplies, that either restores hit points or deals damage of acid, fire, necrotic, or poison, then we gain a bonus to that spell's roll equal to our Intelligence modifier. This is really nice because it now makes our healing that much more efficient, so we could now save our higher level spell slots for exclusively healing, and use all our lower level spell slots, or at least most of them, on our Experimental Elixir to get a little bit more utility options into our combat retinue. At level 10, we're taking a quick pause on both of our Rogue and Artificer levels to jump over to Cleric. We're now an absurd character kind of, since we have 3 classes, but this is the only level we're taking in Cleric, so it's kind of acceptable. The reason we're jumping Cleric is because of the subclass. We are going to pick Life Cleric, and we're going to ignore the bonus proficiency in heavy armor, but we are going to take Disciple of Life. With Disciple of Life, whenever we cast a healing spell that restores hit points to a creature, doesn't matter where we got the healing spell, we just restore 2 plus the level of the spell. That means that our healing spells now restore a minimum of 1, plus our Intelligence modifier because we're using Intelligence to cast them, plus our Intelligence modifier again because we're an Alchemical Savant, plus 2 and the level of the spell. That would be, for right now, about 8 minimum health restored per healing spell. However, that could obviously be increased. Overall, it just makes our healing spells that much more efficient, and since we're only probably using some of them because we want our other spell slots going to our Experimental Elixirs, we're getting the most bang for our buck on our healing spells. At level 11, we are back to being a Rogue 5, and Rogue 5 gives us Uncanny Dodge. It also improves our sneak attack to be 3d6 on a hit. At level 12, we are still a Rogue, and we are now a Rogue 6, making us an Expert again. Basically, we get another round of expertise, so we can pick 2 more skills to be very, very good at. 13, we are a Rogue 7. We now have 4d6 for our sneak attack, which means that we have scaled a little bit quicker now, which is nice. And we also gain Evasion. With all our mobility and all our desire to be right next to our allies on the front lines of combat so we can patch them up in those crucial moments, that means that we are really opening ourselves up to a lot of AoE attacks when we're standing next to our allies. Evasion will allow us to just hopefully avoid any dexterity-based AoE attacks and just not take the damage from like a fireball or a dragon's breath. Level 14, we are now a Rogue 8, and it's time to gain another ability score improvement or feat. We're scaling very poorly for our ability scores, so we are just going to round off our dexterity at 18 and improve our intelligence by 1 to 15. At level 15, we are now an Artificer 6, and that allows us to gain Tool Expertise. Tool Expertise just gives us expertise in tools, so if you didn't pick up Thieves' Tools as part of our Rogue expertise yet, you no longer need to. At level 16, we are a Artificer 7, and here we gain Flash of Genius. Flash of Genius is just an amazing Artificer ability where we can use our reaction to provide a bonus to either an ally or ourselves on an ability check or a saving throw. That bonus equals our Intelligence modifier, which for us isn't great, but we're going to improve it, so it'll be something to look forward to. And that can be really crucial either in combat or even out of combat, technically. At level 17, we are an Artificer 8, and that means that we gain another ability score improvement / feat. This is our second last one, so we do want to try and make it count, but I'm really focused on rounding off our Intelligence modifier. To do that, I'm going to take the Observant feat because it just improves intelligence or wisdom technically, by +1, and then it gives us some other nice bonuses to our passive perception as well as passive investigation. Admittedly, you don't have to take this, but I would just recommend taking any other half feat that would improve our intelligence by +1. At level 18, we are now Artificer 9, and that means that we are going to get our last Alchemist feature that we're actually picking up. And this is kind of going to be our capstone, though it's not necessarily as powerful as an actual capstone. For us, that is Restorative Reagents. We can now cast Lesser Restoration once per day without actually using a spell slot or having the materials to do so, and we also gain a bonus to our experimental elixirs. Whenever a creature drinks them, or at least uses our experimental elixirs, then they gain temporary hit points equal to 2d6 plus our intelligence modifier. Right now, with us having rounded that off, that's 2d6 plus 3. Hopefully we'll be able to improve it, but that's still really nice. And because I've sort of built our Sawbones around the idea of wanting as many experimental elixirs as possible to hand out, to provide a little bit of damage reduction, or a Gloomhaven shield effect, is pretty crucial. We also have access to 3rd level spell slots, meaning that we have that much more healing, assuming we're just using our 1st level spell slots as experimental elixirs. At level 19, we are back to Rogue for Rogue 9, and here we gain our next/last Thief feature. We gain Supreme Sneak, which as a Thief allows us to have advantage on dexterity stealth checks if we move no more than half our speed on our turn. It really isn't too important, but if we were trying to hide during a big battle because maybe we're low on health and we're just trying to stay alive so we can stabilize other party members, then technically being able to bonus action hide as a cunning action, move half our speed, and still have advantage on that stealth check is pretty crucial to allowing us to get a couple extra turns out to be able to heal the party members who need to get up. Also, for what it's worth, our sneak attack is now capped at 5d6. On its own is pretty good, but coupled with our stasis strike when we use that, is a very powerful debuff attack. Finally, at level 20, we are Rogue 10, and that gives us our last ability score improvement/feat. Here I am just improving our intelligence by +2 to put it to 18, and considering our dex and intelligence as capped. That would make our temporary hit points from our experimental elixirs a lot better, plus it improves our actual healing output on our healing spells, making them just that much more efficient. With all that said, let's look at what we have. We are a Sawbones, and that means that we're very good at healing, especially efficiently, plus we are very good at dishing out items that provide utility for our party. I am assuming that we are keeping all our higher than 1st level spell slots for just healing. Maybe some extra damage spells if we really want, but mostly healing. All our 1st level spell slots, which we have 4 of, are just going into experimental elixirs, meaning we should always have 5. Our experimental elixirs have enough bonus effects that they really act like our medkits, given that they don't necessarily provide healing, but they provide utility. And then we have our own potions to provide our own healing with. With herbalism kits, we can make potions, or in this case we could theme those as actual medkits and give those out for our party members to actually use to heal if we want. But I'd rather probably keep those potions for ourselves so we can use fast hands to get the most effective use out of them as possible. Our infused items have also now gone up, which allow us to have up to 3 of them, so you could give all those away. Or, because we've actually gotten to level 9 and made it to some prerequisites, we could pick up items that boost our combat prowess, such as Radiant Weapon. Radiant Weapon would allow us to provide the blinded condition, which could count as like a disarm or a muddle from Gloomhaven, and it just adds more conditions for us to use. We have Stasis Strike, which acts as an immobilize or stun condition, which is really awesome. Our sneak attack allows us to hit relatively hard when we actually do attack in combat, and we have out of combat utility as well. So overall, we're a pretty good utility / support / damage dealer character. We don't excel in any of them, but we have the ability to do all of them. My main regrets for this build are that 1, we scaled pretty poorly, and 2, we didn't get other conditions like poison and wound. If you want those, well, Alchemist Fire, like I said in our Scoundrel, could always count as a wound, and the Poisoner Feat, or just other poisons in general, can count as the poison condition. So it's not like we missed them, we just didn't gain any actual bonus features for those conditions. We do admittedly have some spells that could provide either poison damage, the poison condition, or even some sort of damage over time effects. So be sure to look around in your spells for those if you wanted to have more condition applying abilities rather than just using our spell slots for healing. But that's all up to you. Either way, let me know what you thought of the build and what you would do to get closer to the theme of the Sawbones in D&D. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.